Meanwhile, once his father did become president, corporate publisher Simon & Schuster lined up as well to pay Hunter Biden's bills. There has long been overwhelming evidence that Joe and Hunter Biden's financial lives are not separate at all, but deeply intertwined.
Amidst the unfolding drama, Tucker Carlson's voice rises, revealing a harrowing truth. America faces destruction from within.
So we've got a complex business that intersects with government. We need a guy who knows it.
Right. How do I, deal with getting a guy a visa that needs to come over for a business deal?
Right.
Call our lobbyist that knows the guy in DHS or used to work in DHS or, in Customs and Border Patrol or the people at the embassy and state. They might be able to help.
So it sounds like you've got a perfectly self-sustaining business, $3 billion under management. That's success.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was.
So how does Hunter Biden get involved and why?
So we had this lunch and a mutual friend, or it wasn't even, I don't know how it was, but an attorney of Hunter's, another attorney, Hunter's an attorney as well.
So the reason I'm asking this is because it's not to give the Bidens a pass, hardly, but when people say, well, there's some question about whether Hunter was trading on his father's name, if you live in Washington, that's the whole city right there. So the answer is, in fact, in the question. Whatever Hunter Biden goes down for, and we know he is going to be charged because MSNBC said so, but when that happens, that's Hunter's problem. It's got nothing to do with Joe Biden. Rest easy, America. I mean, you're raising money for a real estate fund, but then the guy from the natural gas company says, talk to the president of Poland about joining the board of our natural gas company.
Right.
Was Hunter Biden mentioned at all?
Hunter Biden was not mentioned, though. I mean, I can't deny that they did some research about Rosemont Seneca Partners, but
because it just seems like
it was not mentioned. It was not mentioned to me.
There has long been overwhelming evidence that Joe and Hunter Biden's financial lives are not separate at all, but deeply intertwined. On Hunter Biden's laptop, there's a suggestion that the two of them even at one point shared a bank account. And of course, Hunter Biden wrote himself that he kicked back cash from his foreign business deals to his father. He wrote that bitterly.
His unwavering convictions serve as a clarion call, rallying citizens to demand accountability and healing from within. As the dramatic saga unfolds.
So, I get it. And you're not the only one who did that.
Right, there were a lot of
Hunter
businesses.
Biden's not the only son of a famous government official who's done this, right? At all. But I just wonder, when you hear people say, well, it's kind of an open question.
Right.
About why they hired Hunter Biden. That's pretty disingenuous, no?
Right. I think at the end of it, so when you look at there are people that maybe were, sons or relatives or brother-in-laws of other high-ranking officials, but I think what we ran into and with what Hunter ran into was almost like an Icarus issue. So he got it was too close to the sun. It was too good to be true. And the connections were too close and the scrutiny too much.
Yes.
And it ended up destroying, it left a wake of a lot of destruction in businesses over a number of years.
So how many, it's been reported and you have said that there were occasions when Joe Biden would call in with clients present on a speakerphone.
Right.
How many times do you think that happened?
I mean, over a 10-year partnership, I would, the number I'm going with is 20. That's probably the amount that I kind of record. Yeah, a lot, you could say.
So Joe Biden, who's very much a product of Washington, of course must have known that he was calling in to effectively a business meeting that his son was having. I mean, he must have understood that was kind of what his son was selling.
Well, that's hard for me to speculate on that.
But I guess my question, just to keep it to the facts, Joe Biden, then the sitting vice president, knew that there were Hunter's business associates in the room.
Yeah, I think I can definitively say at particular dinners or meetings, he knew there were business associates, and or if I was there, I was a business associate too.
Carlson's resonating voice remains a beacon, reminding us all that safeguarding the nation from internal threats is imperative for a strong and united America.
What's the goal of this? Your refuge. There's no goal, he says, grinning with those fake teeth. It just keeps me sane. But actually, there was a goal. And if you didn't know what a virtuous person Hunter Biden was, you might think it looked a lot like money laundering. 2 years after that interview, Hunter Biden was selling prints of his art. And to be clear, just the prints, not the quote, art itself, but effectively photocopies of it for $75,000 a pop. Apparently, Hunter Biden moved 5 of these repros in just days. That's $375,000 in less than a week for signing copies of your fake art. As for the paintings themselves, childish self-indulgent blots, those sold for $500,000 apiece. So the question is, who bought them and why? It'd be interesting to know. There's a story there for sure, but of course we have no right to know. There's no public policy implication. It's not like Hunter Biden's finances have anything to do with his father's finances. Meanwhile, once his father did become president, corporate publisher Simon & Schuster lined up as well to pay Hunter Biden's bills. According to news reports, Simon & Schuster gave Hunter Biden millions of dollars for his highly selective account of his wholly unaccomplished life. And then the publisher lined up brainless celebrity endorsers like Dave Eggers and Stephen King to promote it. King, who apparently will say anything if it helps the party, called Hunter Biden's silly manuscript a, quote, harrowing and compulsively readable memoir. And then Stephen King described Hunter Biden himself as beautiful.
The burden of upholding the nation's integrity rests heavily on his shoulders, navigating treacherous waters with unwavering courage.
So just to sum up what I think we're hearing so far is that you're on a pretty conventional business track.
Correct.
You're working for a big bank at first, and then you decide to move into this burgeoning private equity world,
Right.
which really was exploding at the time. And then at some point, having gotten the business off the ground and it's succeeding, you look to Washington for opportunities there.
Right.
And you run into Hunter Biden or set up with Hunter Biden.
Right. I'm set up with Hunter Biden. And again, at that time, it seemed like, it was hindsight's 2020, but it seemed like an opportunity to just broaden our network, broaden our, competitive advantage on the deal side by having this, access or regulatory understanding of DC is how we properly say it. And maybe expanding our, and getting lucky with a pension fund introduction or another, large maybe there's a political donor that's a $1 billion family office on the West Coast that Hunter has a relationship with. So I thought that was enough reason to kind of not invest in a new company, but just, flirt with a joint venture at the end of the day.
So, and you're in your early 30s at this point.
Yeah,
you're trying to make your way. You wind up, though, with this deal most famously with Burisma.
Burisma, yep.
Yes. How did that come about?
So the Burisma deal came about initially, the CEO, Zolszewski, and Vadim, I'm going to abuse the name.
I have it here. I've got it right here.
Why don't you say it first, and then it'll...
I can't. I got to put my glasses on. Yeah.
Yeah. So Vadim and Nikolai come through. They're working with they're in the network. Again, you're always expanding your network in raising capital and private equity, and work with this group, Tri Global Group,
case.
which
with unwavering
famously
conviction,
also
he
worked
delves
with,
into the
Mayor
depths of this
Giuliani.
disturbing
This is
saga.
another one of their clients, which we found out later, but it was kind of interesting.
Last week, a whistleblower produced WhatsApp messages from Hunter Biden, proving that at the very least, his father knew about his influence peddling businesses abroad and probably participated in them. Quote, "I'm sitting here with my father," Hunter Biden wrote to his Chinese partners demanding money. As much as anything reported about the Bidens over the last several years, this was the smoking. There it is, right there in the message. That would have been enough to cripple a normal president. It would have been more than enough to keep a normal president from running for office again. But it had virtually no effect on Joe Biden. Most media outlets ignored it completely or tried to spin Biden's relationship with his son as some kind of moral victory. Quote, "The real meaning of the Hunter Biden saga, as I see it," wrote Nick Kristof of the New York Times, "isn't about presidential corruption, but is about how widespread addiction is, and about how a determined parent with unconditional love can sometimes reel a child back." He actually wrote that. And if you doubt it, you should know that view was common. It's been reported, and I know that it is true, that Hunter and his brother were very close to their dad.
Absolutely.
Which I think is great.
Yep.
I've got a lot of kids. I'm very close to them, talk to them every day.
Yeah.
never called them on speaker during a business meeting. That's weird. You've got a lot of kids, you're close to them. Do you call them on speaker during business meetings?
Do I call?
I mean, what is that? A grown man calling his dad on a speakerphone during a business meeting?
Right, and to be clear, sometimes it was the call was coming in and the speaker would go on. So it's just the presence. You have to be, I mean, you understand DC, right? So the power to have that access in that conversation, and it's not in a scheduled conference call, and it's a part of your family. That's like the pinnacle of power in DC.
100%. I guess I'm pivoting against the lie that I'm hearing people tell with a straight face. Congressman Goldman, for example, that we don't really know what was going on. Really? You're taking a call from the vice president and you put it on speaker. It's not just, hey, Dad, I'm in a meeting with some buddies.
Right.
It's let me put my dad, the vice president, on speaker.
Yeah. Yep. In the rear view, it's an abuse of soft power, I'd say.
An abuse of soft power. Interesting. When did you meet Joe Biden?
Joe Biden, I met the first time probably at the 2000 convention. I think it was in LA, and then Boston was 2004. So those two times I probably shook hands as they made kind of the power circles around the. You've been to them through the skyboxes.
So a whistleblower produces a text message showing that Joe Biden was in the room with his son,
calling for
when his son was
accountability
selling
and
influence.
truth. Each word he imparts carries the weight of a nation grappling with the implications
ABC's take
of
on it. Joe
internal
Biden is a
turmoil.
father first. Take it or leave it. Needless to say, the book sold miserably, but Hunter Biden got to keep the millions, and that was the point. And so on. This kind of thing apparently happened a lot. Again, there seems to be a story here, and we think it's probably worth learning a lot more about it and bringing it to you. In the coming weeks, we will. In the meantime, though, the question is, what can we learn from Hunter Biden's plea deal today? First off, the obvious. For the children of the people in charge, there are no penalties. There are only upsides. They're princelings. They can do what they want. You are not. Therefore, you can't. So don't get any ideas about cheating on your taxes or violating federal laws unless you want to celebrate next year's Father's Day through the glass in the visitor's room. The rules definitely apply to you, including rules you don't yet know exist. But there's also a deeper lesson here, a more disturbing one. What we're watching through Hunter Biden's life and through the Biden administration, now entering its third year, is the total inversion of virtue. What was once considered admirable is now derided as stupid, if not racist. That would include achievement, intelligence, honesty, self-control, humility. Those are features of the old America. Those were yesterday's virtues. They are gone. In their place, all that we once considered contemptible and repulsive, we're told to worship that now. Here's a small example, but we think a revealing one. In addition to his many other sins, Joe Biden has hired what has to be the single dumbest, nastiest, most dishonest, most ridiculous person he could possibly find for the very public position of White House press secretary. There's a point to it, of course. It was a humiliation exercise. It was designed to degrade the country and dispirit the rest of us. That's the White House press secretary? Shut up! But here's the thing. The White House press secretary herself has no idea why she's in the job. This is from the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, to you personally, and it's personalized here at the bottom. Devin Archer, Rosemont Seneca Partners, that was your partnership with Hunter Biden in Georgetown. Dear Devin, I apologize for not getting a chance to talk to you at the luncheon yesterday. I was having trouble getting away from hosting President Hu Jintang, who was running China at that point. I hope I get a chance to see you again soon with Hunter. I hope you enjoyed lunch. Thanks for coming. Sincerely, Joseph R. Biden Jr. P.S. Handwritten, happy you guys are together. So there are many levels here. But here's the Vice President of the United States saying to you, a man in his mid-30s, who's not a government official, I'm sorry I was occupied with the guy who runs the world's largest country. I would much rather talk to you, and thank you. What was he thanking you for?
Well, First of all, it's a lovely letter, and it was.
It's quite enthusiastic. It's a little weird, though, right?
Yeah. Well, it was kind of the beginning of our partnership, and he was thanking me and thanking Hunter, I think, at the end of the day, for bringing this idea of this government regulatory strategic advisory business into the private equity world. And I think he was excited about the prospects for Hunter, and he was just thanking me. I think it was a nice job.
Back when they still taught logic, statements like this were known as tautologies. Something is true because it is. The more you repeat it, the truer it becomes. So if you're wondering why our country seems so dysfunctional, this is a big part of the reason.
In the heart of the nation, a dramatic struggle unfolds, and Tucker Carlson emerges as the vigilant guardian, shining a blinding light on the calculated maneuvers that seek to place America's cherished principles on the sacrificial altar.
The Biden administration arrested Donald Trump this afternoon. They had him arraigned and fingerprinted in a Miami courthouse, like the accused felon he now technically is. These were the first steps in a process that is designed to put Donald Trump behind bars for the rest of his life. Cable news carried every moment of it live. It's unprecedented, they told us, with what looked like shock. But they weren't shocked. They knew this was coming. Everyone who's paid attention knew it was. What just happened was always going to happen. It's been inevitable since February 16th, 2016. That's the day Donald Trump made a blood enemy of the largest and most powerful organization in human history, which would be the federal government.
With unyielding resolve, Carlson exposes the web of agendas that threaten to unravel the very fabric of the nation, revealing how those in power play a dangerous game with the foundational ideals that have guided America for centuries.
Despite what you may remember, it wasn't anything that Trump had said about immigration or trade with China or rapists from Mexico. Those are the stories that dominated the headlines that year. Trump's a racist, they screamed. Stop him! But inside Washington, that was just noise. None of it really rated. Identity politics doesn't mean much to permanent Washington. What matters, then and now, is foreign policy, the invasions and occupations and proxy wars, the decisions that determine which global populations will thrive and which will die, the policies that come with trillion-dollar price tags, the ones that over time have made the counties around D.C. the richest suburbs in the world. In Washington, that's what actually matters, and it's obvious when you look carefully. When there's a debate about anything else, for example, the debt ceiling, both sides take their assigned positions and they start yelling. But when Congress decides to start a war, no matter how foolish or counterproductive or obviously disconnected from America's core interests that war may be, when that happens, the leaders of both parties automatically jump behind it like circus clowns. And then they stay there, sometimes for decades. They defend that war relentlessly against all evidence until somebody finally rings the all-clear bell and they can begin to admit that actually, maybe it wasn't such a great idea. We meant well, but it just didn't work out. The good news is we've learned a lot of important lessons.
Amid the cacophony of political noise, Carlson stands as a sentinel of truth, narrating a tale of power-hungry maneuvers that undermine the pillars of liberty, justice, and equality that America was built upon.
In the end, they usually do say something like that, but only after emotions have cooled and the damning details have begun to fade from collective memory. It's an apology that's not actually an apology, much less repentance, and it's years too late to matter in any case. But until then, that's all you're getting. Until then, no dissent is allowed. That's the first rule of Washington. But somehow, Trump didn't bother to follow it. He is from out of town, so maybe he didn't know it was a rule, or maybe he just didn't care. Either way, 7.5 years later, we can point to the precise moment that permanent Washington decided to send Donald Trump to prison. Here it is. It's from the Republican candidates debate in Greenville, South Carolina.
We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East. They lied. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
All right.
We should never have been in Iraq, Trump said. We destabilized the Middle East. Now, by the time Trump said that, a lot of Republican primary voters were starting to reach the same conclusion. How could they not? But it was the next line that doomed Trump to today's arrest. They lied, he said. There were no weapons of mass destruction, and they knew there were none. Now, when he said that, a few in the crowd booed. Most just sat there in silence, stunned. Can he say that? Well, he said it anyway. And by saying that, he sealed his fate. That was the one thing you were not allowed to say because it implicated too many people on both sides, which on this topic is really just one side. Hillary Clinton was guilty of it, but so was Paul Ryan. All of them were guilty. They all knew, they all lied. And to a person, they hated Donald Trump for exposing them. After that, it was pretty clear that even if he did get elected president, Trump was going to have a very hard time controlling the federal government he was supposed to be in charge of. Most of permanent Washington decided that thwarting Trump was the single most important mission in their lives. Everything depended on it. Many of them said so publicly, but others didn't say so publicly. In fact, the stealthier ones took another path. They ran toward Trump, not away from him. They sucked up to him. They ingratiated themselves with the man they intuitively understood was susceptible to flattery, which Trump is. And they did this in order to subvert his new administration from the inside. There were a number of these, and you could spot them immediately. They were flatterers. Invariably, the ones who flattered Trump the most hated him the most and disagreed the most strongly with his views. You saw them in the hallways of the White House and at press conferences. They were there slobbering over their boss with elaborate self-abasement, as if they were addressing a monarch or a god. It was a scene from the Ottoman court. It was filthy and decadent, and it was false.
President Trump had classified documents where he shouldn't have had them, and then when given the opportunity to return them, he chose not to do that for whatever reason. When somebody identifies that, you got to turn them in. And so that's inconsistent with protecting America's soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And if the allegations are true, some of these were pretty serious, important documents. And so that's wrong.
May future historians hoping to unlock the mysteries of late Empire Washington study that clip, because it will reveal everything. That very same Mike Pompeo, the one who's sneering at Donald Trump on TV this morning, that guy served Donald Trump as both CIA director and as Secretary of State. Those are the two most powerful jobs in the federal government. And as he worked in those jobs, Pompeo promised, in fact, he swore, to support the president's agenda. Why? Because that's the way a democracy works. You vote for a candidate in the belief that his appointees will carry out the policies that you voted for. It's not about the president, it's about you, the voter. But Pompeo didn't do that. He didn't even try to do that. In fact, he undermined Trump's often stated commitment to peace and non-intervention abroad at every turn. His every waking hour was devoted to fomenting war in some faraway foreign country or other. Iran, Syria, Russia, North Korea, the list goes on. But rather than telling Trump that he disagreed with his ideas, as a man would, Pompeo toadied up to Trump, a man he despised, in the oiliest, most over-the-top way imaginable. Ask anyone who worked in that White House at the time. Who is the appointee most likely to tell Donald Trump on a daily basis that he was handsome, virile, sleek, and powerful? Mike Pompeo. That will be the consensus answer. Those of us who saw firsthand Pompeo's relentless kowtowing will never forget it. It was indelibly repulsive. No one with self-respect could do something like that, but Mike Pompeo did it effortlessly, with relish and verve. Now, this same person is telling Fox News viewers that he fears for the safety of our military, our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, in the approved phrase, because Donald Trump took some classified documents home and didn't immediately return them to the National Archives? What a lie that is. Mike Pompeo knows that's a lie. He spent his entire life in Washington. Washington is a city where internal memos about Labor Day are classified because everything is classified. Your government has classified more than 1 billion federal documents, most of them boring and pointless and a danger to no one, and locked them away in secret where you can't see them because you may be an American citizen, but not really, and therefore you don't have the necessary clearances to know what's going on. And by the way, none of this is done in order to make America safer, any more than COVID restrictions were designed to keep you healthy. No, it's a caste system. That's the point. And you're the untouchable in this hierarchy. Mike Pompeo knows that. Everybody who works in Washington knows that. How many secret documents do you think Dick Cheney took home with him while he was running the Iraq War? How many did his wife read? She never had a clearance. We'll never know the answer because there is no chance Dick Cheney will ever be investigated or his staffers will be told to wear wires in his presence. He will never be indicted for this. Of course not. Dick Cheney is a neocon. Donald Trump is not. Dick Cheney supports war with Russia. Trump does not. That's the difference. The rest is just a distraction. The prosecution of Donald Trump is transparently political. He's literally Joe Biden's main political opponent. He's polling at over 60% among Republican voters right now. So Joe Biden is doing what no president has ever dared to do. He's using law enforcement to lock up his chief rival. That's happening right now. Anyone who denies it's happening is lying to you. But actually, it's worse than that. Trump's prosecution isn't just political, it's ideological. Nobody with Trump's views is allowed to have power in this country. Criticize our wars and you're disqualified. If you keep it up, we'll send you to prison. That's the message Washington is sending. Not just the Democratic Party is sending, but both parties are sending. Like so many Republicans, for example, the supposedly conservative governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, spent yesterday totally ignoring the destruction of the American justice system. Instead, he signed a highly important bill called the Crown Act, which, according to the celebratory tweet Abbott sent commemorating it, will, quote, prohibit discrimination based on textures and hairstyles historically associated with race. In other words, in Texas, cornrows are now protected by law. Having unapproved views about Ukraine is not. That's fine with most elected Republicans. They find Trump tiresome and embarrassing. Their donors hate him. They will not be sad if he dies in jail. But what about voters? What are they learning from this spectacle? Well, mostly they're learning that they have no power at all because nobody cares about them. But they already knew that. Unlike so many of our elected leaders, they have been to America recently. They know what it looks like. Have you seen it? If you've got a few days this summer, find out. Take a road trip and see for yourself. Drive 500 miles in any direction and then come home. How are things looking? Well, they should look great. The federal government spent $6.5 trillion last year. That's more than any government has ever spent, ever. So at the very least, you would expect pristine public roads. Oh no, that's not what you see when you drive around this country. There are potholes and Jersey barriers everywhere. Looks like Tegucigalpa before the Chinese decided to rebuild the infrastructure of Honduras. We don't have China buying our roads, so they're falling apart. You'd think the people you would pass on your road trip would look happy and prosperous. Again, this is a very rich country, but a lot of them don't. Quite a few appear to be strung out on drugs. You see them shuffling by shuttered storefronts in small towns. And you wonder, as you see all of this, where did all the money go? It's certainly not here. Well, it's in Washington. It's in Fairfax and Loudoun counties, and in leafy, perfectly manicured Northwest DC. And of course, a huge chunk of it went to Ukraine, to Zelensky and his friends. Not because you voted for that. You didn't vote to give it to them. You never would. But because Joe Biden and his many allies, from Chuck Schumer to Mitch McConnell to Paul Ryan, and every single news anchor on all of television, all of them believe that Ukraine, its borders, its future, its infrastructure are all more important than the town that you live in. They sincerely think that, and it's obvious. Everyone in power thinks that, except for Donald Trump. Whatever else you say about him, Trump is the one guy with an actual shot at becoming president who dissents from Washington's long-standing pointless war agenda. And for that one fact, they're trying to take Trump out before you can vote for him. And that should upset you more than anything that's happened in American politics in your lifetime. Even if you don't plan to vote for Donald Trump, even if you would die before voting for Donald Trump, which is your right, and a lot of good people feel that way, even still, the destruction of our democracy, which is the right of voters to support any candidate they want, even candidates who don't want war with Russia, the destruction of that should keep you up at night. Yes, Donald Trump is a flawed man, but his sins are minor compared to those of his persecutors. In this life, we don't get to choose our martyrs. We can only choose our principles, and America's are at stake. Really? It's nonsensical to Americans, most of them, because isn't this democracy? Dissatisfied with one thing, we're choosing another? Isn't that our most basic right? And keep in mind, those weren't just talking points you heard. The people mouthing those words believe them sincerely, every one of them, and they're emotional about it. Because if the Democratic Party goes, so do they. The party is the only power they have. Once that party has been rejected, they will be nothing but what they already are. Sad middle-aged mediocrities with tragic personal lives and nothing interesting to say. So everything is on the line for them. They can't lose. And because they can't lose, they're now getting explicit about what if. Here's Ron Klain, Joe Biden's all-powerful chief of staff. issuing an explicit threat to anyone who might be thinking of voting the wrong way.
The president decided a few days ago that it was important to issue one final warning on this issue, to make very clear, to leave no doubt, that we have people out there still peddling the big lie. People now raising the issue of election denial in this election.
One final warning? One final warning? Really? Who do you think you're talking to, Ron Klain? Illiterate villagers? We're Americans. We are free people. You don't get to warn us of anything, much less for the last time. This is your final warning. Yeah, don't think so. You don't get to say that, Ron Klain. You don't get to say anything like that ever. Because this is a democracy, an American democracy, not a Soviet democracy. In our system, you don't get to issue orders to the rest of us on the eve of an election. No, you beg for our consent because our consent is the only legitimacy you have. This is our government. It's not yours. You are the servant. We are the boss. Act like it. Hillary Clinton was guilty of it, but so was Paul Ryan. All of them were guilty. They all knew, they all lied. All I can say at this point is I'm so grateful that he has that position. He's right. And everyone in Washington's wrong. Everyone.
Amidst the whirlwind of political discourse, Tucker Carlson's voice rises, reminding us dramatically of Donald Trump's warning about America.
You know, I think looking back on this 10 years from now, assuming we're still around, I think we're going to see Trump's emergence as the most significant thing to happen in American politics in 100 years, because he reoriented the Republican Party against the wishes of Republican leaders. We should never have been in Iraq, Trump said. We destabilized the Middle East. Now, by the time Trump said that, a lot of Republican primary voters were starting to reach the same conclusion. How could they not? But it was the next line that doomed Trump to today's arrest. They lied, he said. There were no weapons of mass destruction, and they knew there were none. The middle class in America, which has been not the majority since 2015, an anniversary that nobody noticed, has less economic power than it's ever had. That's why Trump got elected, in my view. And now it has less political power than it's ever had. Now, when he said that, a few in the crowd booed. Most just sat there in silence, stunned. Can he say that? Well, he said it anyway. And by saying that, he sealed his fate. That was the one thing you were not allowed to say, because it implicated too many people on both sides, which on this topic is really just one side. But when I think about Trump right now, so it's July of 2023, I'm struck by his foreign policy views. Trump is the only person with stature in the Republican Party, really, who's saying, wait a second, why are we supporting an endless war?
With unwavering conviction, he revisits the prophetic words of the former president, daring us not to ignore their significance.
So if you are taking power away from large segments of your population, you are by definition attacking democracy. That's exactly what you're doing. There's no other name for it. So that's the first thing I noticed. In the name of defending democracy, we took away the things we need to have democracy. Hillary Clinton was guilty of it, but so was Paul Ryan. All of them were guilty. They all knew, they all lied. And to a person, they hated Donald Trump for exposing them. After that, it was pretty clear that even if he did get elected president, Trump was going to have a very hard time controlling the federal government he was supposed to be in charge of. Most of permanent Washington decided that thwarting Trump was the single most important mission in their lives. Everything depended on it. Many of them said so publicly, but others didn't say so publicly. In fact, the stealthier ones took another path. They ran toward Trump, not away from him. They sucked up to him. They ingratiated themselves with the man they intuitively understood was susceptible to flattery, which Trump is. And they did this in order to subvert his new administration from the inside. There were a number of these, and you could spot them immediately. They were flatterers. Invariably, the ones who flattered Trump the most hated him the most and disagreed the most strongly with his views. You saw them in the hallways of the White House and at press conferences. They were there slobbering over their boss with elaborate self-abasement, as if they were addressing a monarch or a god. It was a scene from the Ottoman court. It was filthy and decadent, and it was false. Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, Lindsey Graham in the Congress. They all called Trump a visionary genius up until the moment he lost power.
Through the lens of his impassioned commentary, Carlson becomes a steadfast messenger, urging us to heed the cautionary tale.
I don't think Trump has changed politics in Washington. I think the parties both have been very resistant to any kind of reform, and that's very foolish. That's a Ceausescu move. You see things changing around you, and you can't metabolize it. You can't sort of change with the moment, and then you meet a bad end when you become that rigid. I think that Bobby Kennedy and Trump will both have a very tough time getting the nomination. I'm hoping that both of them will, of course, I guess. I'm hoping that their message will be heard. I don't know. I don't even know what I hope for in the process itself, but I want them to be heard. And they can now be heard because there are channels of information that people can tune into and listen. I mean, I would amend one thing you said when you said that, these huge multinationals control our politics. Well, they also control our media.
Yeah.
They do. I mean, pharma, as you well know and often say on your show, is the biggest advertiser on American television. Probably true in the UK as well. And so, there's no incentive whatsoever to question their products. And now we have, because of the social media companies, Twitter and Rumble, and probably others, we have less filtered sources of information with fewer gatekeepers and a higher probability you'll hear something true. I think that's a huge change. I mean, how can you... this is like samizdat. This is like... this is like information that the people in charge don't want you to see. And now you can see it. It really is the promise of the internet finally fulfilled. That's my hope anyway.
In the shadows of forgetfulness, he stands as a vigilant guardian of history, preserving the echoes of Trump's wisdom.
Despite what you may remember, it wasn't anything that Trump had said about immigration or trade with China or from Mexico. Those are the stories that dominated the headlines that year. Trump's a racist, they screamed. Stop him! But inside Washington, that was just noise. None of it really rated. Identity politics doesn't mean much to permanent Washington. What matters, then and now, is foreign policy. The invasions and occupations and proxy wars. The decisions that determine which global populations will thrive and which will. The policies that come with trillion-dollar price tags. The ones that, over time, have made the counties around D.C. the richest suburbs in the world. In Washington, that's what actually matters. And it's obvious when you look carefully. When there's a debate about anything else, for example, the debt ceiling, both sides take their assigned positions and they start yelling. But when Congress decides to start a war, no matter how foolish or counterproductive or obviously disconnected from America's core interests that war may be, when that happens, the leaders of both parties automatically jump behind it like circus clowns. And then they stay there. Leaving aside whether Trump's going to get the nomination or get elected president or would be a good president, I can't even assess that. All I can say at this point is I'm so grateful that he has that position. He's right. And everyone in Washington's wrong. Everyone. And Trump is right on that question. And it's a big question. That war is reshaping the world. It's reshaping the economy of the world. It's reshaping populations. I was just in Romania last week, which is, of course, shares a border. The refugees in that region, the number of people in that war, Europe will never be the same because of this war. And it really matters. And Trump alone among popular figures in both parties understands that, and I'm grateful for it. Whether he gets the nomination or gets elected, words really matter. Saying something true out loud matters. And he is saying true things about, and God bless him. That's how I feel.
Carlson embodies the collective urgency, giving voice to those who understand the importance of learning from the past. His unwavering convictions serve as a clarion call.
Whatever else you say about him, Trump is the one guy with an actual becoming president who dissents from Washington's long-standing pointless war agenda. And for that one fact, they're trying to take Trump out before you can vote for him. And that should upset you more than anything that's happened in American politics in your lifetime. Even if you don't plan to vote for Donald Trump, even if you would before voting for Donald Trump, which is your right and a lot of good people feel that way, even still, the destruction of our democracy, which is the right of voters to support any candidate they want, even candidates who don't want war with Russia, the destruction of that should keep you up at night. Yes, Donald Trump is a flawed man, but his sins are minor compared to those of his persecutors. In this life, we don't get to choose our martyrs. We can only choose our principles, and America's are at stake. So at this point, you may be wondering about the identity of those nonpartisan computer scientists who dug up all this new information about Donald Trump's direct connection to Vladimir Putin. Who are these people? Well, you may not be shocked to learn they weren't nonpartisan. Once again, Jake Sullivan was lying to us. In fact, a pro-Hillary Clinton activist from South Africa called Rodney Joffe had put together a team of digital researchers. Oppo guys, we used to call them. Most of them came from Georgia Tech. In emails, Rodney Joffe explained why he was doing this. He wanted Hillary to win the presidency because Hillary Clinton had promised him a job as a top cybersecurity officer in the US government. So Joffe wanted to help Hillary win. He said that. In order to do that, he gave his nonpartisan computer scientists a mission. Their job was to gather data they had access to thanks to a Pentagon contract in order to connect Donald Trump to Putin. Now, we know all this thanks to a new court filing from special counsel John Durham, who spent the last few years investigating the origins of the Russia hoax and is finally producing some material. In the words of Durham's filing, quote, Joffe tasked those researchers to mine internet data to establish an inference and a narrative tying then-candidate Trump to Russia. So this wasn't reporting, of course. They had a goal. They were trying to get Hillary elected president. The amazing thing is how they did it, where their data came from. The filing says that Joffe and his computer scientists intercepted internet traffic, that is, emails and presumably text messages, from, quote, Trump Tower, Donald Trump's Central Park West apartment building, and the executive office of the President of the United States. In other words, Trump was right. This isn't a conspiracy theory. His claims were true. Democrats were spying on Donald Trump, not just as a candidate, but as President of the United States in the White House, as well as in his own home.
Rallying citizens to reflect on the significance of Trump's cautionary words. As the dramatic journey unfolds, Carlson's resonating voice remains a beacon.
It was a spasm of rage that Trump definitely helped inspire. That's true. And at the election results. Okay, you know, I'm not actually for that. I don't think leaders should be making people more pissed in general. But that's what it was. It was not an insurrection. And to put Jacob Chansley, an American citizen, a Navy veteran, in jail for years after he was let into the Senate chamber by uniformed Capitol Hill police officers, and then I play that and I'm the bad guy? Like, what do you make of that? I'm sorry, it makes me mad just thinking about it. I said I wasn't going to be a hater. That makes me mad. And I see people on other channels, it's outrageous. He's trying to minimize January 6th. Well, but what? This guy went to prison. You ever been to prison?
Only for visits.
Right, okay.
It's not very nice.
You don't want to go to prison to take a man's freedom away and call him all these names for something he didn't do and then show no remorse at all when you are exposed to have lied about it. This is a human being who was locked away in a prison. It's an outrage to me. If you watch Donald Trump closely over his 4 years in office, and we did, it became pretty clear that the more outlandish the claim that Trump happened to be making, the more likely it was to be true. Trump did tend to exaggerate at times, but it was mostly about topics that didn't matter. How big was the crowd at his 2016 inauguration? Meanwhile, Trump is talking in a way that nobody else is about the most serious threat to this country, which is nuclear war. A nuclear war that the Biden administration seems intent on sparking through recklessness and truly crazy behavior. And then, of course, the second greatest threat to the United States, the other thing you never hear about as we yammer on about trans rights, is the decline of the US dollar.
Reminding us all to honor the lessons of the past, lest we repeat history's mistakes.
But on the big things, on matters of civilizational importance, Trump told the truth bluntly, often when nobody else would. The Iraq War was a mistake, Trump said. Illegal immigration is a disaster. China is taking over the world. Haiti is a pretty crappy place. Deafening hysteria followed every one of these demonstrably true statements. So the takeaway from the interview we did with Trump yesterday lasted over an hour. was whatever you think of his answers, the conversation was about real topics. It was not about global warming or systemic racism or trans rights. It was about nuclear war, the US dollar and its strength against other currencies, our trade balance, the things that actually define a country. At one point in early 2018, CNN and the Washington Post got so worked up trying to hide the obvious that they devoted blanket coverage to the claim that actually Haiti is an awesome and fully functional country, a perfect spot for your next family vacation. And by the way, if you disagree with that, you're racist. That's what they told us. 3 years later, they have dropped the pose, at least on Haiti. Our leaders now consider Haiti so awful that just being from there qualifies you for asylum in the United States. With Trump gone, they can finally admit that. What was once a dangerous conspiracy theory is now just a sensible observation, especially when it justifies more immigration. For 4 years, no dangerous conspiracy theory was considered more dangerous or more conspiratorial than the claim that Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign had spied on Donald Trump. The very idea that Hillary Clinton, of all people, had spied on anyone was preposterous, the media informed us. Only a lunatic would claim otherwise. By making a charge like that, in fact, Trump was emboldening our enemies and degrading the public's confidence in our democratic system. So it wasn't just a stupid opinion that Trump had. It was really a form of treason. And yet tonight, we regret to tell you that we have a problem. So to recap, we are currently fighting a war for democracy on behalf of a leader who just casually announced he's happy to end democracy.
As the political stage unfolds, Tucker Carlson's voice rises, shedding light on a dramatic truth. Democrats are unafraid to play dirty in the arena of power.
This morning, it looks like somebody blew up the Kakhovka Dam in southern. The rushing wall of water wiped out entire villages, destroyed a critical hydropower plant, and as of tonight, puts the largest nuclear reactor in Europe in danger of melting down. Why exactly are we at war with Russia? It seems like there's a pretty significant downside to this particular foreign policy decision, starting with economic collapse and ending potentially with extinction. So is there a good reason we're doing it? So many innocent young people so many hundreds of billions of dollars have been wasted, some of them from the US Treasury. So what's the point?
With unwavering resolve, he peels back the curtain, daring to expose the dark maneuvers that often shape the course of politics.
You saw this in the war? It began, and the first thing you knew, you could have divergent opinions, I guess, about which weapon systems to send. But you were told at the very beginning that, Russia was our enemy. One thing we know about this is that one side is bad and one side is virtuous.
Amidst the fierce battles, his piercing insights reveal a side of the political game seldom acknowledged, where ambition knows no bounds.
So if this was intentional, it was not a military tactic, it was an act. The question is, who did it? Well, let's see. The Kakhovka Dam was effectively Russian. It was built by the Russian government. It currently sits in Russian-controlled territory.
Through the lens of his commentary, Carlson becomes a relentless advocate for transparency, unearthing the tactics that thrive in the shadows.
Are we really doing this so the Biden family can repay its debts to the oligarchs who financed their beach house in Rehoboth? Are we doing it so our government can continue to lie about its illicit biolabs in Eastern Europe? So that flabby losers like Toria Nuland and Tony Blinken can feel like they're doing something important with their sad, empty lives? Really?
In the face of misinformation, he stands as a staunch guardian of journalistic integrity, fiercely committed to unearthing unvarnished truths.
I think a lot of decent people would reach that conclusion independently. I'm not contesting that. I think it's completely fair to think Russia's bad. But it's also within bounds to not agree with that. Because if you're an American, you have the right to decide who you hate.
As the political drama continues, Carlson's voice remains a beacon.
The dam's reservoir supplies water to Crimea, which has been, for the last 240 years, home of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Blowing up the dam may be bad, but it hurts Russia more. And for precisely that reason, the government has considered destroying it. In December, the Washington Post quoted a general saying his men had fired American-made rockets at the dam's floodgate as a test strike. So really, once the facts start coming in, it becomes much less of a mystery what might have happened to the dam. Any fair person would conclude that probably blew it up. just as you would assume they blew up Nord Stream, the Russian natural gas pipeline, last fall, and in fact did do that, as we now know. It's not like Vladimir Putin is anxious to wage war on himself. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Mr. and Mrs. Cable News consumer. Vladimir Putin is exactly that sort of man, the sort of man who did himself in order to annoy you. We know this from the American media, which wasted no time this morning in accusing the Russians of sabotaging their own infrastructure. Bill Kristol, the man who once told us that Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11, immediately denounced Putin as a war criminal, and even more savagely compared him to Donald Trump.
A reminder that only by facing the uncomfortable truths can we hope to foster a more ethical political landscape.
Honestly, there's got to be a better reason for waging this, the most pointless war of all. What is it? Well, thankfully, we have an answer. The war against Russia, ladies and gentlemen, the war against Putin is in fact a war for democracy. So soon the leaders of both parties in Washington signed on to the Russia collusion hoax. It had the twin benefits of paralyzing the Trump administration, which it did, and justifying the expansion of the national security state. As the years passed and the rhetoric intensified, hysteria set in. After a while, anybody with a heterodox opinion, from right-wingers to avowed socialists, could be accused of working secretly for Vladimir Putin. Many were accused and some were destroyed by it. It was a textbook witch hunt, far more effective than McCarthyism. And unlike McCarthyism, it never ended. Russia remained America's greatest enemy, even as China emerged as America's greatest threat. Over time, the lie that Democrats told to hide their in the 2016 primaries came to dominate America's foreign policy, and then to imperil America itself. For generations, statesmen and diplomats worked to prevent other great powers from aligning as a bloc against the U.S. The idea was pretty straightforward. You might be able to beat one strong country, but if a couple of strong countries ever got together, you would lose. This is why Richard Nixon went to China, to make sure the Chinese government didn't align with Brezhnev, with the Russians. Donald Trump understood this very clearly. Russia will never be our closest ally, he said. But if Russia ever becomes China's ally, we're in deep trouble. The combination of natural resources, military and economic power, and sheer population would make the Russian-Chinese alliance the most powerful force in the world. The United States would soon be dethroned. We'd be taking orders. As Trump put it, there is no reason to make Russia our enemy, and there are many reasons not to. The rest of the pundit class made similar, clearly coordinated noises. Putin did it! Putin did it! And their reasoning was simple. Putin is evil, and evil people do evil things purely for the dark joy of being evil. In this specific case, Putin attacked himself, which is the most evil thing you can do, and therefore perfectly in character for a man that evil. That was their explanation. No one who's paid to cover these things seemed to entertain even the possibility it could have been who did it. No chance of that. As you may have heard, is led by a man called Zelensky. We can say for a certain fact that he was not involved. He couldn't have been. Unequivocally, with people to remain a democracy, it's a bipartisan view. Democracy must prevail. You just heard noted democracy expert Nancy Pelosi say, the daughter of the mobbed-up mayor of Baltimore. As Pelosi puts it, people are fighting the fight for their democracy and for ours as well. That's right, for ours as well. Without democracy, in other words, we can have no democracy here. If they aren't free, neither are we. We must make sure they can vote in Kiev so we can continue to vote in Kansas City. It's really that simple. And yet tonight, we regret to tell you that we have a problem. It looks like they're not going to be able to vote in Kiev anymore. And no, for once, it's not Putin's fault. Democracy seems to be suspended by the world's foremost democracy advocate himself, Field Marshal Zelensky. It was a sound case, but official Washington ignored him. Their response shouted in unison, "Shut up, Putin stooge!" And then they set about trying to provoke a war with Russia. Now they have succeeded. But the war we're fighting is not against Russia alone, but also against Russia's newest ally, the People's Republic of China. What Donald Trump predicted has happened, and in the worst way. If the war continues, we will lose no matter how it ends. The world order is being reshuffled as we watch, and by the time it's over, the U.S. will no longer be at the top of the deck. That is very obvious to the rest of the world. But what's fascinating is how few Americans seem to understand what's happening or its consequences. But how would they know? No one in American politics or media will tell them the truth. Since the first hours after the invasion, Americans have been fed a steady diet of increasingly absurd lies. Google and Facebook have joined with the Biden administration to censor any factual information that contradicts the official storyline. It's dystopian. Joe Biden's first remarks about the war gave no hint that we would be sending advanced weapons systems and American military advisors, then supporting the entire government and its pension system with hundreds of billions of US tax dollars. No, Joe Biden mentioned only sanctions, which are free. Sanctions he suggested would be enough. Zelensky is too decent. Now, you see him on television, and it's true you might form a different impression. Sweaty and rat-like, a comedian turned oligarch, a persecutor of Christians, a friend of BlackRock. But don't believe your own eyes. Actually, Mr. Zelensky is a very good man. The best, really. As George W. Bush once noted, he is our generation's Winston Churchill. Of all the people in the world, our shifty friend in the tracksuit is uniquely incapable of blowing up a dam. He's literally a living saint, a man in whom there is no sin. That's why Lindsey Graham is so attracted to him. They're just two good people, hanging out together and being good. And like all good people, when they meet in person, they spend a lot of time talking about people and laughing like friends do. So when you have an election, well, he says if we win, we'll let people vote. Otherwise, no. You vote when we feel like it, because ultimately we're completely in charge and make all the rules. Your job is to obey or be punished. That's our version of self-government. Self means me. I'm the government. Now, that's not just any autocrat. That's our chief ally in the war for democracy. This is the guy who just announced he's likely to cancel next year's elections. So you've got to wonder what the Biden administration thinks of this. We can't possibly continue to support Zelensky, that guy, after he said that, can we? Because in a clip less than 30 seconds long, he just blew up our entire rationale for supporting his side in the war. So we can't support him. Oh, of course we can. And we will. Here's Joe Biden from yesterday reaffirming America's unequivocal support. The Russians are, it's the best money we've ever spent, Graham says. A smile spreads across his thin, quivering lips as he forms the words. He looks like a starving man contemplating a breakfast buffet. The aroma has aroused Lindsey Graham. Thanks so much, replies Zelensky. He feels the same way. See, there's nothing dark here. Just two middle-aged guys celebrating a population. They don't seem like the kind of people who'd enjoy flooding villages or starting a famine. And in any case, who cares if they are? It's really not your business. So to recap, we are currently fighting a war for democracy on behalf of a leader who just casually announced he's happy to end democracy, and our democracy-supporting leaders have no problem with that. In fact, they're strongly for it. Shocked? You shouldn't be. Of course they're for it. You should have seen this coming. Wars for democracy always cancel democracy in the process. That's why our leaders love them. And they all do it, even the virtuous leaders. Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. The British government under Winston Churchill threw an entire opposition party into prison and let them rot for the duration, in some cases with their families. So in a war for democracy, you can do anything. Imagine what a man might do who has fewer principles. If that man, say, ran, he might seize churches, arrest priests, ban all criticism of himself, disappear his political opponents. And that's happening. Just last month, Zelensky threw a man called Gonzalo Lira into prison indefinitely for daring to write about the government in unflattering ways. Now, what's interesting, what separates this from other such cases, is that Lira is an American citizen. So Joe Biden, who is quite a bit of SWAT, as they say, could have freed Gonzalo Lira within hours. But he didn't. He didn't want to. He didn't say a word about it. He remains in prison tonight. So that makes you wonder, what's the real motive here? When normal people see war, they see destruction, sadness, and suffering. But that's not what demagogues see. They understand it differently. They know that war means power, mostly for them. During wartime, everything they do can be justified. War is the gravest of all emergencies. Imagine lockdowns times 1,000 plus drones. Once war breaks out, politicians become gods with the power of life. It is vitally important for you to support because it's necessary for you to be supported by you. Your support is mandatory until it's finished, whatever it is, and whatever that means. So shut up and support, or else you're in trouble. Back when they still taught logic, statements like this were known as tautologies. Something is true because it is. The more you repeat it, the truer it becomes. It's a self-reinforcing reality. There was a time when tautologies were considered illegitimate arguments, not to mention hilariously stupid. Only dumb people talk like that. Now everybody in power talks like that. Diversity is our strength. Trans women are women. Zelensky is Churchill. It's all self-evidently true. Doesn't need an explanation, and don't ask questions. So in a peaceful democracy, you have to debate your political opponents in public, and that's tiresome. But in a war for democracy, you can just throw them in jail or have them executed. You can see that many in Washington are looking forward to that moment. And that may be why they so fervently support Joe Biden, even many Republicans, against a potential opponent, the only opponent who opposes the war. If you were to end the war, their power would evaporate. How many people do you know who've been injured by the vaccine? Well, a ton. If you are a good person, you will follow these rules. You will mask, you will separate, you will stay at home.
In the shadows of this pandemic, Tucker Carlson emerges as a relentless seeker of truth, unearthing the haunting realities that shroud the pandemic's impact.
Because they don't have any idea it's happening. So for example, there were people who didn't kind of play along. We knew what the rules were. And every organization in American life, every large group of people in American life, from your government to the entire media, in some cases your church, we're all telling the same thing. Here are the rules. The net effect has been to make people completely ignorant of the core, of the actual facts, like the non-disputed facts about a lot of different things. And you saw this certainly so that challenges the idea of democracy, which, rests on the notion of an informed voting public, of a citizenry. And we don't have that.
With an unwavering spirit, he delves deep into the abyss, fearlessly challenging prevailing narratives and exposing the hidden consequences that haunt us all.
But I lost so much faith in humanity during it. If you would have told me how it would have gone down before, we're not that bad. I thought the people aren't that dumb.
Amidst the chaos, his piercing insights revealed a profound toll on society, laying bare the vulnerabilities and fractures that threaten to tear us apart.
If you are a good person, you will follow these rules. You will mask, you will separate, you will stay at home. We have no idea what's in it. We don't know its long-term effects, but shut up. This is a moral test, and if you want to pass, you will obey. And there will be people who decide to opt out, but they are, and everyone agreed on this, they're outlaws.
Through the airwaves, Carlson becomes a fearless advocate for transparency, amplifying the voices that demand accountability and justice in this dark hour.
Everything I found repulsive, who in the middle of decided, no, I'm not going along with this. And once you say one true thing and stick with it, all kinds of other true things occur to you. The truth is contagious. Lying is, but the truth is as well. And the second you decide to tell the truth about something, you are filled with this, I don't want to get supernatural on you, but you are filled with this power from somewhere else. Try it. Tell the truth about something. You feel it every day.
As misinformation looms, he stands as a beacon of journalistic integrity, steadfastly combating the shadows of uncertainty with unwavering truth.
And I had a very unique view of it, because in the first days of when people were falling over in China and the Italian hospitals were overrun, at the height of the panic, when most people believed, because it was the very beginning, early stages, my brother and I had a very logical conversation and said, we're two military-aged men in very good physical condition. If we do this, the world's over.
Each resounding word carries the weight of a nation yearning for clarity amidst the tumultuous aftermath of the pandemic of COVID-19.
One of the powers that government did usurp over the past several years is the right to decide what medicine you take in the form of mandates. How did you feel about that? And how many did you take? And how do you feel about it now, in retrospect?
How many did you take?
0. But I think it's fair, and I can see that you recoiled when I asked you that question, and I don't think, honestly, you should be asking people about their medical care, but that became a matter of public policy. And I do think that the whole country ought to pause and assess, like, what did we just go through? How do we feel about it now? And so it's a very straightforward question.
So we found the only 2 countries that were open, which were Sweden and Belarus. We had just been to Belarus. We'd just been there. We decided to try Sweden. So for the first 3 months during the height of lockdowns, when Florida was closed, when it was absolute,
I remember.
Yeah, when it was the craziest lockdowns globally, me and Tristan are in Sweden in absolute freedom. They had no restrictions, no masks, no vaccine passports, no social distancing, nightclubs are full, restaurants are open, perfectly complete normal society. Nobody talks about this anymore. Nobody talks about, wait, Sweden never did a thing. Everything functioned perfectly fine the entire time. And they don't have it. Where's their mass? Where's their illness their winter of severe illness?
Yes.
They never had one. It's a cold country. Never had one. So we were living in Sweden, living completely normal lives, seeing the internet and seeing this insanity. And we're like, well, surely if we just put up a few videos of us partying in Sweden in nightclubs, this will wake people up. People ignored their own eyes. That's the scariest thing about everything, is that they can get to a level where, with the media machine, where people will genuinely ignore their own eyes. I don't understand how you can get people so brainwashed that they will see that the sky is blue, and then they'll watch that the sky is green, and then they'll look at it again and go, the sky's green. It's crazy to me, but it proves they can do that.
How many people do you know who? And it was like, well, a lot. Well, who are they? Well, like a friend of mine's, her grandparents. What was her name? I don't know. His grandparent. How old was she? Well, late 80s. Okay. How many people do you know who've been injured by the vaccine? Well, a ton. So the media in this country do not exist to inform you, obviously, but to mislead you on behalf of the people in power. So it's not surprising the footage you're about to see has been hidden in years. It just surfaced in a PBS special, of all places. It shows the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, and Tony Fauci in 2021 visiting residents in a black neighborhood in D.C. to push the vaccine. And you can assess for yourself how well that went. The government cracking down on Islamic extremists, dangerous revolutionaries in their midst? No, just ordinary Australians complaining, demonstrating peacefully against the lockdowns, beaten by police. There's a lot of footage like this from Australia, and in a moment we'll show you more. But something that's not immediately obvious from the American vantage is that this isn't all of Australia. The whole country is not locked down. In Australia, most of the lockdowns are in the eastern part of the country. That's where the capital of the country is. That's where the federal government has the most control. The western part, the less populated part of Australia, meanwhile, which is home to most of the country's natural resources, isn't locked down at all. 50,000 fans just crowded inside a stadium for a rugby match in Perth, the capital of Western Australia. No one was beaten with nightsticks or hosed by the police. The rugby match was not a super spreader event. Western Australia has had virtually no cases of. How does that happen? How does Western Australia not lock down but remain virtually free? Simple, by controlling its borders. Western Australia did not let thousands of people stream in from anywhere they wanted to in the world. They're not Texas. They didn't care about protecting their borders. They weren't worried about being called racist. It seemed common sense, and it worked. And here's the revealing thing. In Australia, the federal government is angry that Western Australia has closed its borders. They want that part of the country to open those borders. Really? Why would that be? Well, according to ABC News, Australia's government is, quote, arguing that Western Australia's internal border restrictions are a drag on the national economy, end quote. Well, that's kind of interesting, because the problem with Australia's economy right now does not come from Western Australia closing its borders. It comes from the lockdowns. Those are the biggest drag on the national economy ever conceived in Australia. So are those police SWAT teams beating people for going outside. So great. The people of Ward 8 may be poor, but they're not stupid. Notice Tony Fauci gazes at them like he's walking through the zoo with contempt and a little bit of fear. So he kept getting questions like this from the poor but not stupid people of Ward 8 in D.C. One lady asked Tony Fauci if the vaccine would prevent her from getting, which is the most basic of all questions. So we want to pause for a minute to give you a sense of the scope of the pandemic in Australia. to date has caused 1,300, quote, recorded in the entire country. Australia has 25 million people. Now, that 1,300 figure includes people who, what does that mean? We have no idea. No one's ever defined it. In Alberta, Canada, and this might tell you something, the health minister just announced that anyone who stays home from any illness will be counted by the Canadian government as a patient. Then she pretended she didn't say that because it's obviously insane, but it's on video so we know that she did. In Australia, the government has adopted a similar standard. Anyone who leaves home apparently is also being counted as a patient. The Wall Street Journal reported the Biden administration has finally concluded that yes, it was not naturally occurring. It didn't emerge organically from a pangolin, whatever that is, at the wet market, whatever that is. No, the virus came from a Chinese military lab where it was created. That's the determination of the Department of Energy based on new intelligence that, of course, everyone already had. Now, we learned this, interestingly, from a newspaper. We did not learn it directly from the Biden administration because Joe Biden hasn't said a word about it. And that's a little odd. 1 million Americans, they tell us, close to 7 million globally. So it's inherently a big story. Now, it is true that the origin of is not directly related to anti-trans racism. So it's not unnatural for Joe Biden. He doesn't have his talking points already written. But it might still make for a good topic for, say, a primetime address to the nation. He might mention it to us. He might answer a few other questions while he's at it. For example, is Joe Biden still sending money to China for biotech research? The administration was actually doing that, sending cash to that same Wuhan lab as recently as last year. Are they still doing that? And bigger picture, have their views on China changed now they know that China is responsible for the almost 7 million people? Now that we know China unleashed on the world, intentionally or not, and then lied about it for sure, and then hid life-saving genetic information about the virus from the scientists who are trying to respond to. Now we know all of that. Does Joe Biden still consider Vladimir Putin, he's so bad, the greatest threat to world peace and stability? It does seem like this story could overturn some of our previous assumptions. Well, Joe Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, went on CNN yesterday to answer precisely none of these questions. Instead, he told us, we're still not sure where it came from. Here's the interesting thing. Apart, that's obvious authoritarianism. It's terrifying that that could happen in a civilized English-speaking country, in Australia, of all places. But you'll notice the police never ask the man if he's been vaccinated. You'd think that'd be the first question you'd ask, because vaccination works, doesn't it? That's why it's mandatory, right? That's an important point because publicly, Australia's leaders are still pretending that vaccination status matters. In New South Wales, again in eastern Australia, one official promised that the unvaccinated will be allowed to retain their freedoms. Well, there's never a consensus in Washington about anything, particularly not with the intel agencies. They're lying. We know perfectly well where it came from. We've known this for years. In fact, one of the very first things we knew about was that it was an engineered virus that escaped somehow, intentionally or not, from a Chinese military biolab in Wuhan. It was in early March of 2020, 3 full years ago, at the very beginning, that we did a long open on this show about the Chinese research paper whose authors later disappeared. Now, these Chinese scientific researchers scolded the Chinese government for the lax safety standards that they said allowed to escape and infect the world. This was 3 years ago. No more freedom if you don't get the vax. But they will arrest you for being outside smoking a cigarette a block from your home without a mask and not even ask you whether you've been vaccinated. So if vaccination status is that important as a health matter, wouldn't that be the first question you ask? But they didn't even bother. Meanwhile, in the same Australian state, New South Wales, officials are telling people that whether they are vaccinated or not, they're not allowed to go to church. So there was a physician who worked on coronaviruses for the Chinese military, who was in Wuhan, telling us in September of 2020 that the Chinese government did this intentionally to wreck the West, to people and destroy the economies of its rivals here in the West. Now, if you're a middle-class Christian American, it's hard to imagine that level of malice existing anywhere in the world. You just would never consider doing something like that. But with the Chinese, are they serious enough? Yeah, probably. But instead of following up on that, people attacked the woman you just saw, really attacked her, and then attacked us for giving her airtime. Pants on fire, you're lying, said the quote fact checkers. But she wasn't lying. And Tony Fauci and many others in the US government knew that she wasn't lying. In fact, they knew the truth about where it came from, long before the rest of us had even heard the term. In mid-November of 2019, a friendly Asian government, we have learned, sent a cable to American officials warning that there was evidence or something strange going on in Wuhan, and it looked like a dangerous leak from a biolab. They knew that. The origins of it were never a secret. The real story, the great outrage of this story, is that the people who knew or should have known the truth lied about the truth. Why? To hide the Chinese government's role in the destruction of the American economy. That's the interesting part, looking back 3 years later. From the beginning of the outbreak, the American media, as one, took the side of the Chinese government in this new propaganda war. And Trump, once again, to his credit, knew. He knew exactly where this came from. He didn't say so directly, he should have, but instead he alluded to it. He called it the China virus. And when he did that, he was over the target, so the Chinese government attacked him. They've learned a thing or two from watching American politics as a, quote, racist. Nothing like this has ever been attempted at scale. It's one of the most grotesque and destructive experiments in human history.
It's terrible if a child's mind is warped by any propaganda mechanism. They're innocent.
In a moment of profound introspection, Tucker Carlson, the impassioned truth seeker, emerges as a voice of concern.
Let's say you wanted to control a country. How would you start? Well, you'd want to make sure you had the complete obedience of everybody inside your borders who was authorized to use force. You would start with the military, and then federal law enforcement, then move your way down ultimately to agencies like the IRS. Female qualities are virtuous. Masculine qualities are oppressive. That's the message. In case it wasn't clear enough, schools around the country have removed urinals from boys' bathrooms. The male body itself is shameful. Sit down when you pee like a good little girl.
His words carrying the weight of sorrow and apprehension as he warns that America is losing its identity.
Controlling the guns would be a top priority for you if you ever wanted to go dictatorial, if you wanted to be baby doc. But let's say you had deeper ambitions. Let's say you wanted the power not simply to control people's behavior, but to control how they think, not just their bodies, but their minds, as a god would.
With an unwavering gaze that peers into the depths of societal shifts, Carlson's impassioned words become a rallying cry.
Views like this are often called feminism or woke politics, but in fact they amount to mass conversion therapy, an attempt to change the fundamental nature of people. Nothing like this has ever been attempted at scale. It's one of the most grotesque and destructive experiments in human history.
Imploring the nation to re-examine its values and rediscover the essence of what it truly means to be American.
So the Biden administration has made a practice now for over 2 years of picking federal judges based on the way they look, based instead of their competence. And the confirmation hearings for these judges are as painful as you would expect they would be.
Urging Americans to rediscover the common threads that bind them together and honor the legacy of those who came before.
Pardon the feedback, but you heard the point. White supremacy is the most dangerous threat to the American homeland. Joe Biden just told us that. It's more dangerous than the threat of nuclear war with Russia. It's more dangerous than the threat of the Mexican cartels, who've already hundreds of thousands of Americans and are now in control of swaths of our southwestern states. White supremacy is that bad, Joe Biden says. In fact, it's worse. But what is it? That's the question. Can anyone in authority actually define white supremacy? What is it? Is white supremacy liking white people too much? If so, that's going to put those of us with white children in a pretty tough spot. Or is white supremacy something much more obviously bad, like trying to expel all non-whites from America and creating some kind of ethno-state? If that's Joe Biden's definition, what exactly is the scope of this threat? How many people are currently working on this American white ethno-state project? And what are the chances they're going to pull it off? Our guess is not very many and precisely zero. But we can't say for sure because no one has showed us the numbers.
The nation grapples with the consequences of losing its identity, and Carlson's words become a catalyst for a national conversation.
There is an unfortunate reality, and I'm not going to be called a bigot, I'm going to talk about the reality that the homosexual community cannot reproduce in and of themselves. So for them to have a community into the future, they do need your children. That's how they think. For there to be a homosexual community in 100 years from now, they need straight people's kids. Because only straight people have children. So they're telling the truth. That's the first. They mean what they say. The second thing is, I think a lot of this is an attention grab by them. I think they are slightly disappointed in how tolerant many people actually are. I have no problem with gay people, I don't care. I'm gay, cool. I want to get married, fine. I'm gonna wave my in your kid's face. Wait.
Yeah.
They push it to a point where we have to react. And then when we react, they say we're bigoted. Children are innocent, and destruction of innocence is one of the most disgusting things on the face of the planet. It's terrible if a child's mind is warped by any propaganda mechanism. They're innocent. What I don't understand is why, imagine heterosexual men walking around naked saying we're coming for the children.
Inspiring a tireless pursuit of unity and a renewed commitment to the values that define America.
So with the current behavior of our politicians. As recently as the 1992 presidential campaign, adultery was considered disqualifying for anyone seeking higher office. Bill Clinton was very nearly derailed in the New Hampshire primary by his affair with Jennifer Flowers. Clinton went to elaborate lengths to lie about the relationship because he had no choice. But he was the last presidential candidate who had to meet the standard. By 2008, it was obvious to anybody who was paying attention that Barack Obama had a strange and highly creepy personal life. Yet nobody ever asked him about it. By that point, a leader's behavior within his own marriage, the core relationship of his life, had been declared irrelevant. It was Barack Obama's business, not yours. One by one, with increasing speed, our old taboos have been struck down. Those that remain have lost their moral force. Stealing, flaunting your wealth, striking women, smoking marijuana on the street, shameless public hypocrisy, taking other people's money for not working. All of these things used to be considered unacceptable in America, not anymore. So it probably shouldn't surprise us that the greatest taboo of all is teetering on the edge of acceptability. A generation ago, talking to someone else's children about it was widely considered grounds for a thrashing. Touching them was effectively a penalty offense. When Jeffrey Dahmer was bludgeoned to death in the bathroom of a Wisconsin prison in 1994, the Milwaukee district attorney had to caution the public not to turn Dahmer into a folk hero.
And that's what's so scary about all of it. And it's also kind of funny that like this whole LGBTQ thing is also linked to the patriarchy, also linked to all this other garbage and all these other false narratives and false ideas. And it's these people who are attacking me saying I'm dangerous for women because I'm a misogynist. You're dangerous for women for pretending men are women. You're more dangerous for women than I am. I'm saying a man's a man's, a woman's a woman. You're saying that if I put a wig on, I could go punch women in the face in the boxing ring. Who's dangerous for women? It's insanity. And again, they have no virtue at all. They just weaponize garbage and attack you with it. But I do think that children have to at least be the bottom line for society. That's the future. And if you have children at home, you're raising them. And if you struggle to feed them, the government doesn't care. They are yours, and they're your problem and your responsibility, and you deal with all of the stress and all the worry of them being out late at night and all the responsibility of taking care of them, and you went through hell for them to exist. You don't owe their minds to anybody else. You don't owe it. So there has to be a point where you stand up and say, no, I raised this child.
It's my child.
That's my child. It's not yours. Absolutely.
What do you make of Julian Assange?
I think that it's crazy. It's the number one way to shut up the BBC, that's for sure. To mention him. Say, oh, you're a journalist. You care about journalism, do you? You care about a fair and independent story. Why is Assange in Belmarsh? Very interesting.
What do they say?
They don't answer. They try and change subject. They always do. I did it. I stole it from the Azerbaijani president. And this is what I'm saying about the world. There's so many places in the world where they still live very firmly in the real world. All of this garbage is just the result of the very simple, easy lives that we have. Inside the movie The Matrix, which I recommend you watch, the agents say, we tried to create a utopia for the human mind so that your mind is in a utopian state and your body can just be used. But the human mind rejects utopia. We created the world in 1999 at the pinnacle of human civilization before machines took over because the human mind needs struggle and it needs problems, otherwise it rejects it.
In that case, you need to take charge of the society's taboos. A taboo is something that by popular consensus is not allowed. A taboo may not be illegal, but it doesn't need to be. Over time, social prohibitions are more powerful and more enduring than laws. Societies are defined by what they will not permit, as are famously religions. Muslims don't eat pork, neither do Orthodox Jews. Traditional Christians oppose extramarital, the Amish avoid electricity, and so on. American society isn't overtly religious, but it's governed by taboos, and it always has been. What's interesting is how fast our taboos are changing. This is not happening organically. What we're allowed to dislike is being dictated to us from above, sometimes by force. Until fairly recently, for example, it was taboo in this country to attack people on the basis of their race. That was the main lesson of the Second World War, we were told again and again. The one thing we learned from them is that it's dangerous to reduce human beings to their genetic code. There is no master race. That made sense, but apparently we no longer believe it. Punishing people based on their skin color is not only permitted in modern America, it is mandatory throughout business and government and higher education, as long as the victims are white. At one time, that would have been unimaginable. But if you're talking about rights, you at some point want to identify the most basic human right of all. What is that? Well, of course, it's the right of self-defense. That's the essential right upon which all other rights depend. If you can't defend yourself, you can't defend your family and your property, you don't have any rights at all. You're a by definition. So you may be wondering, in this moment of creeping authoritarianism, how is the right to self-defense doing in our country? Self-defense, the cornerstone of all freedoms, without which you cannot be free, you are owned. Self-defense is becoming illegal, in effect, in a lot of places. And not just in very liberal places, like New York City, even in states with some of the strongest self-defense laws on the books. Arizona, for example, allows residents to shoot trespassers on their property. So 73-year-old George Allen Kelly lived right on the border. Now, you may have heard that Joe Biden opened the border to millions and millions of people from other countries whose identities we don't know to just walk in. So if you live on the border, this has changed your life completely, and it scared you. And in any case, it's not like pedophiles are barging into the Capitol building to sit in Nancy Pelosi's chair or asking uncomfortable questions about the last election. For miscreants like that, no punishment is too harsh. So far this month, the FBI's Washington field office has issued 11 press releases. 10 out of 11 have been about January 6th. Keep in mind that January 6th happened more than 2.5 years ago. Now you know why the feds were ignoring kid touchers on Instagram. They're too busy to respond. They've got much more important things to do, like finding white supremacists. White supremacists are America's new child molesters. We've got zero tolerance for white supremacists because no one threatens the life of this country more than they do. Now, we have no idea what any of that means any more than Xi Jinping does, but the trained seals in the crowd loved it. They clapped consistent with their species. Actually, sorry, that is unfair to seals. There's not a seal in the ocean, or even at SeaWorld, who would wear an I love abortion pin. That is too low even for marine mammals. They may eat live fish, but they're not ghouls. Congressional Democrats, by contrast, are ghouls. Take a look at this pin, which has replaced the American flag on their lapels. Notice that the O in abortion is in the shape of a heart. They literally love abortion. Now, let's set aside the politics and ask an honest question. Who loves abortion? Honestly, who loves abortion? Maybe you think abortion should be legal, but do you love abortion? Do you think abortion is a wonderful, affirming act you feel so proud of? You brag about it with jewelry? If you feel that way, you should know that you are not defending a medical procedure. You wouldn't say that about an appendectomy. No. You are promoting an ancient religious rite called human sacrifice. That's what this is. Promoting human sacrifice. Let's stop lying about it. It's very obvious now. Now, that is not only a lie, provably a lie, because reliable statistics exist. It's a lie that's caused a lot of people, including a lot of Black Americans, to over the last 3 years, because police in many places have stopped enforcing the law, and in others have simply quit, and they're replaced by total mediocrities and crazy violent people like the cops who beat Tyree Nichols in Memphis. How do you think they got that job? Because normal people quit. That's why. Because they didn't want to work in an industry that's under attack unfairly from the President of the United States. an underage boy fending off violence from a child molester was denounced as the villain. Ultimately, he was indicted for murder. One of the things that this tells us is that people who run our country no longer see us as the worst among us. It's never been more obvious than it was yesterday when the Wall Street Journal ran a long expose about kiddie poo on Instagram. Instagram, the journal found, quote, helps connect and promote a vast network of accounts openly devoted to the commission and purchase of underage content. Instagram connects pedophiles and connects them to content sellers of child porn. In one instance, the paper discovered that Instagram was recommending the phrase incest toddlers to users who'd expressed interest in similar material. By the way, no one at Instagram denied that any of this had happened, nor did Mark Zuckerberg, who controls the company. The journal story was accurate. It was all pretty shocking, but not as shocking as what happened next, which was effectively nothing at all. The largest circulation newspaper in the United States revealed that one of the world's most influential companies was promoting pedophilia, and nobody in power did anything about it. The Justice Department did not announce an investigation. Congress did not schedule hearings. The guy who runs Instagram, Adam Mosseri, still has his job. In fact, Mosseri's last tweet, which is pinned, is a video of himself bragging about how effective Instagram's algorithm is.